So we're going to be discussing virtual reality and its progression into actual reality, discussing how a product made for video games is transforming and integrating itself into the larger world. So getting right into it, to really discuss virtual reality to its fullest, we really need to start at its beginning, and its beginning was in video games. So virtual reality, or VR as it's more commonly known, really got its big popularity boom in the 2010s with the coming of its next generation headsets. What made these headsets so different from their predecessors was that the visuals became much more realistic, and oftentimes new users that would put them on became disoriented with the physical world. So what I mean by disoriented is that several times in videos you'll see online, first-time users of the headsets will actually often have at least two people on either side of them to hold them back, because oftentimes when the headset goes on and there's a few minutes in the virtual world, a scenario can happen and the user will react to it physically and possibly fall forward or fall backwards, injuring themselves. And this happens so much that it leads one who doesn't wear the headset to believe this must feel like real life, even if it doesn't fully look like that. So after a couple of years, to join the new visuals of these next generation headsets, we were introduced to haptic gear. So haptic gear is gear that's meant to simulate the feeling of whatever's being presented on screen in the visual world. So the vest that you see right here, it goes from the full torso, a bit of the shoulders, into the elbows, depending on who manufactured the vest. But the feeling is that if you were to get shot in the virtual world, you would feel it somewhere on your physical body if you're wearing the vest. The same thing is happening with the haptic gloves. The gloves, as you can see in this particular model, are meant to restrict your hand movements so that if you were to be picking up an apple in the virtual world, the exoskeleton would restrict you from fully closing your fingers so that it feels like you are gripping something, even if you can tell that there's nothing there. Obviously, you could break this restriction, but that would lose the effect, but it's meant to feel as if there is something keeping you back, as if you really had something. So due to its success in its video game format, it's quite easy to see why VR would be ambitious now and try and integrate itself into the larger world, into fields that you would not usually, if ever, imagine could be integrated with virtual reality. Three big fields have been education, research, and healthcare. So starting off with education, VR has found a lot of its success through its use of being used in the classroom on younger students. The students who use the headsets have been found to be completely immersed and entertained in whatever they're being taught at that time. And they describe the experience as enjoyable because it is being displayed in enjoyable game formats. So the students who use the headsets have been shown to retain information they're being taught with them on a lot longer than students who are being shown the same information in a format they would consider boring, such as sitting through a lecture or taking home a test or just doing busy work. So then in research, VR has been helpful in promoting a stronger physical reaction out of exercise, especially in elderly people. In one study, elderly cyclists were being monitored, and through the use of the headsets, results showed that a virtual reality enhanced exercise program can actually reduce the risk of mild cognitive impairment during aging. So then moving on to healthcare, two big things that VR has helped is one, VR allows trainee surgeons to create models in order to practice on based off real-time patients, a patient that they will eventually operate on. With these models, the trainees can go back as many times as they need to perform until they feel as if they've perfected the technique they need to use on this specific patient. And then when the trainees go to operate on the patient their model was modeled after, there is a much higher chance of success without injury. So then the second thing in healthcare that VR has helped is it's a very welcome type of therapy for those suffering from certain phobias, such as a fear of spiders or a fear of flying. With the fear of spiders, whenever a patient puts on the headset, their a environment is displayed in front of them that they would visit in their everyday life, like the grocery store, patio, or the park, and a spider will be there. So this same repetition of a different environment with a spider is done so many times that eventually the fear of the creature subsides. Maybe it won't go away completely, but it will get lower and lower, so that when they encounter the spider in real life, it'll be a breeze as opposed to being completely shut down with fear. So then with flying, where most therapy to help with this is a patient and a therapist to both get a very expensive ticket to God knows where, and going through the whole flight, VR takes away that plane ticket price, and then it also allows the patient to master the entire plane flight step by step. So if you were doing takeoff, you could master that until you felt good with takeoff, and then move on to actual flying. And then once you feel like you're okay with actual flying, you move on to landing, etc., etc. But the point is that VR allows for baby steps to be accomplished instead of just going through an entire flight and hoping that the whole flight goes off without a hitch and the patient not freaking out at some point. As useful as research is in understanding how VR works for the everyday user, hearing actual accounts from an actual user is completely crucial in fully understanding VR. Due to my not owning a headset and being a year too young to enter a VR bar to observe users, my main source of information actually came from online, the discussion website Reddit, and my main means of research was the user who went by the name Octorine. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right because we only were able to message computer-wise. So thankfully, because most of our correspondence went on through the computer, the isolation that COVID has brought upon the world did not really make too much of a problem with our communications. The pandemic did actually become a topic at one point towards the end, in my communicators often saying that the participation of VR had spiked incredibly since isolation, which was not very shocking to hear, but still nice to know that it was happening and there was evidence. So moving on to Octorine's actual VR experience. Hearing about it was really insightful, and they explained that they had owned a VR headset of some form for about 4 years now, which happened to be when the next generation headsets were really making a breakthrough. So it was interesting to hear about someone owning the VR set in its infancy almost, in its next generation infancy. And when I asked how that was, Octorine said that they had had a blast getting to watch the birth of a new medium firsthand, and so that was really good to hear of someone. In the time since their purchase, they've gone through what someone would call a backward step, in that when Octorine first had their headset, it was wireless, and now they have transitioned into a stationary headset which means that it would be connected to a console or to a computer. So when I asked why this change, Octorine said that it had to be done in order to enjoy the visuals that came with the new headset, as this was a new model. So with every model, there's some upgrades, and this one was the visuals. So when I asked how that was, and if they regretted their decisions, Octorine was quick to say that they missed the wireless headset, but they wouldn't go back for it at this time because the improved in visuals, comfort, and higher frame rate were made up more for it. So they gained more than they lost, but they did miss what they had lost, in other words. So after discussing Octarine's actual experiences with VR, I wanted to understand what they thought the future of VR would look like in their opinion. And the main response they had was very insightful, and it led me to think they've actually thought about this for a while or researched into it. But what they had to say was that, and I'm quoting them, I don't think we're going to see any tipping point where VR goes from non-viable to dominant overnight, as in like it doesn't just become the main source of our living, or it doesn't become a very important part of our lives all of a sudden, like that's all we do, or that's how we all interact with each other. I think adoption is going to keep slowly increasing year over year until one day we think to ourselves, hey, whatever happened to monitors? Monitors just being like the screens. Guys, anyone remember monitors? So when they described this, I thought, wow, I hadn't really thought of the progression in that way, how it would take more of a gradual approach. I don't think that I thought that it would, as they said, become dominant out of nowhere, but hearing someone say that VR would gradually just seep into our lives until the point we didn't really notice it had been there was something to think about. It was something that I realized I also believed in. I just needed to hear someone else say it. So since I believe in this gradual approach, these pictures here on the side are depictions of a type of VR in media. Right here we have a scene from Ready Player One, and right here we have a scene from Black Mirror, two medias that depict technology in a very advanced form that we have now, but in current time. But as mentioned, since I believe that this will now be a gradual approach, I think we're still very far from either of these two mediums depictions, but I think gradually we can get there, hopefully in my lifetime, but I think it's definitely the goal. This is our main goal to get to. Goal. Sorry about my handwriting. So my overall conclusion, like I said in the last slide, is that there's tons of evidence to show that VR is making a gradual approach into everyday mainstream. And although it isn't at the place that CGI depicts it in an abundance of medias for sci-fi movies, I think that it can get there. It definitely has the potential to get there if it takes its time and gradually makes its way up. And overall, I do believe that VR will become a larger part of our overall world, and it may not be today, and it may not be tomorrow, but gradually I think it's going to become a crucial part of life in the future for whoever gets to enjoy it and experience it.